Oh, cool. My mic was off the entire time. Awesome. Okay, so that happened. Let's try this again. So we have Steven from GovernHQ here today. He's also wearing a few other hats, really cool guests. And this is, of course, the weekly DAO Talk from DeXe. I'm David Kieva, and let Steven introduce himself while I mute my mic back so he can speak.
Awesome. And yeah, don't worry, that happens to me all the time. But hey everyone, thanks for having me here. I'm Stefen from Govern. Govern is a DAO tools platform and protocol where you can think of it as a kind of GitHub for all kind of work instead of just for dev work, where we help, regular DAO contributors record their contributions and keep track of, and helps them and the entire DAO or the entire community to basically keep track of what's going on in real time. Because the biggest issue we see with DAOs is that because of the decentralized nature, often nobody actually knows what's going on. And then also wear a number of other hats. I run the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance, which is focused on just blockchain advocacy and a lot of the times education in the Caribbean region. But yeah, that's my intro.
Awesome. I was going to ask about it later, but since you mentioned it, let's start with the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance part, because I know there's a bit of a battle in jurisdictions between Switzerland and the Caribbean, and a few other territories, notably Singapore, Hong Kong, etc., for bringing in DAOs, bringing in DeFi companies. Why the Caribbean? What's happened in the Caribbean? What's exciting in the blockchain world within the Caribbean?
Yeah, it's a great question. And also for context, I'm from the Bahamas, born and raised. And I think it was like between 2015 and 2016, I was basically trying to meet up and chat with other people in the region who were doing stuff in the space. And we eventually, formed a little community. And that is eventually what became the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance. So over those years, we kind of, especially the last few years, we still do a few things now, but it's not as regular. But we mainly did a lot of webinars, workshops, courses, and stuff like that, as well as a little bit of like public policy related stuff, and like meeting with governments, meeting with central banks and whatnot. But for the reason why, I mean, I think, and this is true for most of the global South, I think, but definitely for the Caribbean, in that, in terms of financial access and economic access, it can be pretty limited for a number of different reasons. So I think what this space in general allows for is a new way for a lot of people who didn't have proper financial or economic access before to actually gain it. And yeah, there's just been a lot of experimentation happening in the Caribbean because it's small and you can move and iterate pretty quickly. It's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of, actually, surprisingly, governments who have been incredibly pro use and experimentation with this technology. So it's always been a bit of a hotbed for crypto projects, even the ones, mainly the ones that were like created in the Caribbean.
Awesome. I think we're all collectively jealous of you as soon as you became collectively jealous as soon as you mentioned that you were born and raised in the Bahamas. But aside from that, I see from your bio that you're kind of focused on building trust between contributors and DAOs, and I think that's a very big topic in DAOs personally. Well, before we dive too deeply into it, can you kind of give a high-level overview of what it looks like, why it's needed, just generally gist of what it's all about?
Yeah, for sure, we can get into it. The main thing is that, I mean, what we know of DAOs, and obviously, a lot of DAOs take very different forms, but I'd say the majority, or at least a lot of them, there are, it's mainly made up of contributors. There's not necessarily, I mean, there may be a quote unquote leader, but that leader is not necessarily, or shouldn't necessarily be, like micromanaging all the work that's happened. So what happens is a lot of DAOs look very different from traditional firms in that there may not be a direct boss or there may not be a direct manager. Um, so what that creates is this idea or this aspect of what we call bottom-up style of contribution or bottom-up style of governance, which means that, any individual person, any regular person can, have his own or have their own autonomy and have their own agency and do the work that needs to be done without, uh, people specifically telling them what to do or how to do it or looking over their shoulder, as many bosses actually do. But of course, with that benefit also comes a risk of it can be less manageable or it can be a little chaotic or very chaotic, honestly. And again, like I said earlier, one of the biggest issues we see is that in DAOs is that even with this really cool setup, because of its nature, a lot of times people just can't keep track of what's going on. Or maybe you have, like, for example, one contributor says they're going to do something or going to do some piece of work and they end up not doing it. But because, maybe they didn't put it in the Discord or however you communicate, you don't, like, the rest of the DAO doesn't know that this piece of work wasn't done maybe until weeks later. So now you have this mad scramble to actually get the work done. It's incredibly inefficient. Or the opposite happens where maybe someone does a piece of work, but doesn't make it known and doesn't say that they did it. So of course the DAO doesn't realize it actually happened, and then someone else comes to do that same piece of work. And now you have this, it's less of an issue, but it still becomes an inefficiency because now you have people wasting their time doing work that was already done. So because of that, there is this kind of issue with coordination. And sometimes it's an issue with trust because if someone says they're going to do something and they don't do it, now everyone's kind of screwed. So all that to say, what Govern really helps with at the end of the day is coordination between contributors and coordination within the DAO. And that comes from this idea of, again, autonomy, but also you recording. I wish I could do like a demo right now. It'd be really cool. But you recording or you making note of the work that you've done and the work that you said you're going to do. And then also for checks and balances, given that we're talking about trust, we also have what we call attestations, which are basically another contributor who either did that work with you or saw it being done or saw it happen, can basically co-sign or attest that, yes, this person actually did what they said to do. And we can also build, and this is what we have on our platform as well, we have different frameworks where, maybe after a certain number of attestations from other contributors, then your work can be verified or accepted by the DAO.
Are you worried at all that this can create a system of, corruption where people just attest each other and not actually do the work?
Yeah, and given that we're social animals and social organizations, that there is always some risk of that, right? But I think the important thing is to mitigate that as much as possible. So say you make a contribution and then let's give an extreme, you make like 100 bots to test your work
all the time. I'm behind all the major hacks that ever happened in crypto. Alpha right here.
I knew it. But what happened? So if that happens, then what can you do against that? So first of all, there's a number of things that kind of combine together. So first of all, if you have your DAO and Govern, your community can basically set who's allowed to contribute and who isn't, and also who's allowed to attest and who isn't. And usually it can be something like, oh, if you haven't already joined this community in this way, you can't attest to anyone else's work. So there's that boundary. And there's also the boundary of, if you're all working together as a community and I see a name attesting that I don't recognize or haven't seen before, of course, it's going to raise red flags. And I, or maybe the entire community, is going to ask, okay, what is this? And then say another example where you do something and I know you didn't do it, but I still attest to it. My name is attached to that as well, or at least like my handle or whatever you choose is attached to that as well. which means that I'm now putting my reputation on the line to cover for you, and then we both end up in problems because everyone's gonna say, "Wait, why'd you do that?" So but at the end of the day, there are essentially ways to mitigate these issues, and there are a number of other ones too. But yeah,
I like what you said about putting your name on the line. We used to have two worlds in a way of, the real life sort of physical name world, right? The passport name, the birth name, and the anonymous world of various forums and chat rooms, etc., where anyone could post anything and have zero repercussions. And now we're kind of moving towards the middle world of the anonymous world, right? Of whatever you wallet, your Bright ID, your other IDs. Do you see now or see a trend towards where your pseudonymous identity is connected to so many things and has so much invested in it in terms of your reputation and things it's connected to, that it becomes really kind of a self-governing mechanism to ensure fair play and curb abuse in a way, because your name is on the line, even though no one might know your physical looks and name and address and all those things, but your anonymous crypto name is worth its weight in satoshis, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really is all about trust at the end of the day, and trust frameworks, trust mechanisms. So even if, on Twitter or on a platform, my name doesn't have to be Stefen, it could be like OX DeXe or something, right? But even though my name is connected to that name OX DeXe would still hold my reputation. So if I do something negative or I do something like really stupid, people will be like, wait, what is this person doing? So it doesn't necessarily take away trust or necessarily take away responsibility. I do think there's probably going to be more anons than less in the next 10 years. So the real question is about making sure that you can build this question of trust frameworks outside of just like an individual name. And again, like one example that we're experimenting with is this like trust framework or this verification framework where, only certain people can do attestations maybe. But that's also left up to the community, specific community to decide. So, but it could be maybe, again, only some people can do attestations, and out of all the people who are doing attestations, you need maybe 3 or maybe even 4 if it's a lower trust environment, or maybe just 1 or 2 if it's a higher trust environment. So it's all about creating these interactions where people can still be, even if their name is like XXXX, whatever, they can still be trusted at the end of the day, and you can still know that this is someone who does their work or is very responsive to things, for example. So yeah, it's a really good question.
When you talk about, trying to see who could be using their reputation and making those attestation decisions, do you see a trend possibly towards, power of experts and trusting experts more, or, reputation being built more so within the community context? What's kind of the role of subject matter expertise, let's say, versus community trust, versus maybe some other factors, and I'm not even thinking of, there are other factors you can think of that I'm maybe missing to build trust and reputation in the community?
Yeah, and I think expertise definitely plays a part, especially when you can have confidence that, okay, this person actually knows what they're doing. So for example, a lot of DAOs interact in different maybe workshops or different like sub DAOs or pods, for example, where let's say if it's about, maybe if it's interacting with the treasury, it could be people who are both trusted because of doing maybe a particular amount or number of contributions, but also to, from their previous work that they are good at something, for example. So, and that's one of the other aspects of Govern that we focus on, where, at the end of the day, the contributions that you self-record, you own that. You can mint it on chain if you want, and it's not just for the specific DAO or community that you're working with. It's also for you as an individual. So even after, say you leave that DAO or something happens to it negatively, and you end up working with another DAO or with another community, you can still have that record of your contributions. You can still take that with you and say, well, this is actually, as well as, the specific attestations that were part of it. And you can go and say, yeah, this is the work that I've done. You can see, I mean, it is kind of like a resume at the end of the day, as much as I hate the word resume. But yeah, being able to have and own that record of your work is extremely important. And that also, of course, helps with understanding, who has particular subject matter, who's done this amount of work in the community, etc.
I'm looking at the comments to the talk, and one of them may be relevant to what we're talking about. The person's asking, let me see the handle. The King of the Southlands is asking, he's asking about DeXe specifically, but I'm assuming let's kind of shift it towards our DAO discussion in general about voting rights and decision-making power and how that's distributed. So in taking that as kind of the basis, and do you see sort of playing around with voting rights and voting power based on reputation, based on contributions, based on expertise, based on which other DAOs are participating in, based on OG status or NFTs are holder, a billion other factors? Like any ideas on how we could be moving towards aligning voting power with expertise and with reputation, while still, of course, making it fair and rewarding to those who hold the tokens, the governance tokens or NFTs of the DAO, and not excluding them from the process, right?
Yeah, there's a whole heap of factors. I'm actually, sorry, I'm trying to find, I did a talk last year. I did it for ETH Denver, but I think the one at TapCon was a little better, on the idea of contribution-based governance and how what we're doing. Let's see if, here we go. Just going to try to pin it.
Yeah, it's fun to just throw in the comments so that the listeners can check it out. And obviously, you can send it to me. I can post it on Twitter later.
Yeah, I'll send it to you now. But yeah, it's the idea of contribution-based governance, and what does it look like if, because we all know token voting is very problematic for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's shit. Honestly, it's not great.
Yeah, 100%. So what happens is, at in the rawest way, you have maybe the people who, maybe the whales, for example, who bought a crazy amount of the token now has so much decision power and has so much governance power. Meanwhile, the people who are actually doing the work may not, that even like they, first of all, they may not be getting paid in the token. They may be getting paid in USDC or something, right? So they're not accumulating governance power at all. They're not receiving it at all. And maybe they weren't able to buy a bunch at the beginning. So the idea of contribution-based governance is that, as you continue to do the work, because, which means that you're the one actually making this DAO run. If you're doing, like, everyone who's actually contributing is what the DAO is made out of. So at the end of the day, the idea is that the people who are doing this work should be the ones who are making the decisions in some way. It doesn't have to be only that. It could be kind of a hybrid where some of it is token based and some of it is contribution based, and maybe some of it is, NFT based, for example. Okay, I just sent it. So yeah, that's really, honestly, at the end of the day, it's that if you're looking at contributions as a foundation, as like the basis upon which you build everything else, and this is also why we made Govern as modular as possible, where you can have, the contributions of your peers, the contributions of your group as the foundation. Then you can also build maybe an identity module, or well, rather a reputation module on top of that, or maybe a voting module on top of that. But at the end of the day, you have these contributions potentially, on chain as well, as the basis for governance. at the end of the day?
I just thought of a possibly very controversial question, but just for lulz, right? Let's ask it. I'm just gonna say it. Do DAOs actually need the free riders? So by free riders, for those who are not aware, I'm talking about people who bought the governance token, who may be like voting automatically on every proposal in order to get a drop, or may not be voting at all. They may not even know what's going on, but they do hold the governance token. They bought it, they have it, but they do nothing at all, no contributions at all to the DAO. So hypothetically speaking, would DAOs be better off just having fewer members, but every member contributing?
That's hilarious. I mean, not to cop out, but obviously the answer is it depends. But I do think there are a lot of situations where it should be, kept small, and just focus on maybe growth at a certain point, and I think this is what a lot of DAOs do anyway, where a lot of DAOs do now as opposed to earlier on, where they're starting very small, keeping it just to like main contributors, and over time growing out. I do think the early aspects of just like, let everybody in super chaotically, willy-nilly, can obviously lead to a lot of problems. So yeah, it's weird because there's so many different iterations and interactions, and there's going to be free riders at all points, and the free rider could be a random contributor, or the free rider could be a whale that put a lot of money in the token. So yeah, it's all about kind of managing what you can as you continue to grow.
Since this is fun, let's just keep playing with it a little bit more. What do you think about negative incentives for participation? Obviously, there's positive ones like, greater rewards and trust and reputation. What about negative ones like somehow making people's tokens worth less in some way, reducing the drops they're getting, maybe to the point of kicking them out if they haven't participated for a long time? Obviously it's a spectrum, but just as a kind of carrot and stick approach, is there space for a stick in the crypto world, in the DAO world, or are we only carrots and no sticks at all?
I think there's definitely room, and I mean, I'm always down for more experimentation with different mechanisms. Positive reinforcement, positive incentives is usually stronger than negative, but I think, sometimes negative can kind of cover some gaps when necessary. So for example, there are, options where maybe the amount of your token is worth less if you're not doing a particular thing, like if you're not engaging in voting, or if you're not actually contributing. The potential for that kind of interaction could be interesting. There's also what HAT's protocol is doing, for example, where if you can even have a specific role within your DAO, but if you're, for whatever reason, if you're not actually doing the work, or maybe just time passes, that role, or that maybe an NFT that gave you a particular access or particular power to do something gets revoked. Maybe it could just be a time thing. Maybe it's because you didn't actually do what you're supposed to do. There are definitely different kinds of interactions that I think could be pretty useful. Again, I don't know if they're as strong as the positive ones, but they definitely could cover gaps.
Awesome. Let's keep talking about trust. So, you probably saw the Azuki mess, right? With the elementals thing, and now there's a DAO, Azuki DAO, that just formed spontaneously, or maybe not so spontaneously, and they want to kind of claw back, I think, around like 39 million worth of ETH, right? The pound or something, quite significant. There's all these, I think there's a rug pull yesterday, actually, from some protocol. I mean, another day, another rug pull, right? So, speaking of trust, speaking of breaking trust, it seems like one of the bigger ones, one of the ones definitely most people are concerned with, is the founder, or the head chef in Sushi's case, uh, breaking trust and rug pulling or in other ways screwing over the community. What mechanisms are there? Obviously, decentralizing the organization, the whole point of DAO does work to do that. But more specifically, in addition to that, what better ways could there be out there that we could be working towards to maximize the trust in the founder and in the managing team, let's say, but especially in the founder, and to maintain the trust and to kind of maybe enforce it positively or negatively, however it is.
Yeah, it's a good question. And yeah, founder trust is kind of always a factor. But yeah, obviously there's a lot of ways to at least try to minimize it. If you're token based, you can look at the ongoing distribution of the token, and how that affects voting, for example. Or you could again do a rules based thing where, depending on who's doing what, or the contributions that they're making, then they can kind of take the place of, like, maybe, initially the founder's in charge of 10 things, but as more people come up, you distribute that access or that power, so that this one founder doesn't have, even if he didn't want to, just the ability or the access to rug pull people. And again, also, there's so many issues with Treasury that are going on where maybe you add more people to a multi-sig so that one person has less chance of being able to do whatever they want to do, or you interact as a Moloch DAO. So instead of just creating a multi-sig, now you have a much more robust way of interacting with Treasury, for example, which automatically makes it more decentralized. So yeah, there's a lot of tools that actually help with this a lot, and just take away that power. But of course, a lot of DAOs may not necessarily be using these tools, and that's what makes it difficult.
I saw there's a lot of comments. I'm kind of like listening and reading comments at the same time. And there's another one that's a bit broad, but I think it's interesting, especially since you just talked about it in a way, about how DAO handles conflicts and decision-making in decentralized manner. Now, we know in general how it does it, right? But in terms of a way that, if there's a really, really big conflict and there's a big split and it threatens to destabilize the DAO and split it, and you have reputable people on both sides, is there sort of de-escalation approach? Is there sort of a way to work through this together rather than just putting up for a vote, and then those who disagree leave the DAO and form their own DAO? I mean, we know the basic ways, we know the common ways, but what other ways are possible that are, I would say, less conflicting and more, I don't know, consoling, for lack of a better word?
Sorry, actually, I missed the first part of the question. You mind repeating?
Oh yeah, so basically, like, if there's a big conflict in the DAO and it's split down the middle and there's experts on both sides and the community is really adamant about both sides, and we don't want to go through the usual process of, basically have a community deciding one way and winning and the rest just splitting up into DAO X.2, are there better ways you can think of that will get them to see each other's points and to come up with a solution that works well together, keeping the DAO intact?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, forking is honestly pretty valid as an option, like if it's to that point of total gridlock. And at the end of the day, it's like, it's fine if people want to go off and do something else. But as always, just like any workplace, any organization, there are so many internal, and I think it's worth people actually looking this up, or maybe check out the Ready, which is a really cool organization that's focused on these exact problems. Yeah, so many ways of maybe de-escalating or just argument resolution or opposition resolution that is honestly less about DAOs and more about just how people come to decisions and how people interact in general. So that usually takes a very um, social interaction, a social aspect, but it is really important. And I think that's something that each community can kind of grow on their own. But that has to be like, there's no real automation for that. That's where the real work comes in, because you're engaging with people at the end of the day.
Exactly. It really does. And yeah, I have my own answer to this, but I'm curious about your opinion. Just going a little bit meta and again being a little controversial, just to space out a bit. Just in general, is the DAO as a structure, is it the best for trust? Is it the best for an organization for trust? Or maybe not. Maybe maybe the traditional hierarchical organization is better, or maybe some other one, maybe something tribal, something, whatever it is, right? But like, going out into the big picture, are we even in the right structure here? Are DAOs really the best?
No, but potentially
Oh,
yes.
that was great.
But I mean, let's be real, right? Like, and this is why I brought up earlier that this question of trust frameworks, because right now, as it stands, most DAOs do not have any real aspect of trust or any trust mechanisms or frameworks put in place, which is why, like for example, again with Govern, like one of the biggest things that we push is this idea of trust frameworks, where you need to, like, you have to understand that you're working with other people. You probably don't know them or don't know who they are, but you're also trying to build a working relationship with these people or working environment with these people. So how do you actually know that every day what you do is going to be reciprocated, or what you do is actually going to be benefited, I guess? And yeah, you have to have these frameworks in place, and these frameworks are also things that are still just being understood. And yeah, like, to counter that as well, like, you have, I'd say the majority, let's say like a startup or a traditional business, they're much easier because maybe you see the people every day or you interact with them on a much closer level, and you have contracts. So it's much harder for someone to just kind of do something untrustworthy. Also, but of course, the problem is as well, a lot of the times, maybe like, just like you said with the idea of founder trust or founder rug pulls, when you have a very, very centralized organizational structure, the person at the top does have a lot of leeway, a lot of access and power and possibility to do really negative things, both, maybe for you as an employee or just for people in general. So I think what DAOs do allow for it, when they're actually built properly, when they actually have these mechanisms in place, is to reduce, like, effectively reduce that possibility of, we can call it a rug pull at the end of the day, but it can mean so many different things. But yeah, it's for DAOs to actually succeed and for DAOs to actually make sense, they have to have trust frameworks in play. Otherwise, they're all going to fail.
Yeah, because it's just gonna be everyone trying to pull towards themselves and do something for their benefit and not really caring about others in any true sense. And that doesn't work. We already seen that. And I'm curious, coming back to contributions, we could talk about, number of contributions, type of contributions, and the reputation that they've made in the forums and Discord, etc. But when it comes down to it, what does define a contributor? What defines a good contributor, a true contributor, an effective contributor, valuable contributor, right? Like, not in terms of specific algorithm, right? That, okay, XYZ, like here we figure out the coefficients, like this is the exact formula, boom, but just kind of in a human way, like, if you were building the perfect DAO, what would you look for to really measure whether someone's a true contributor or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, at the end of the day, it just comes down to, does this person show up? Does this person actually contribute? And this is something that you can see in maybe, open source projects on GitHub, for example, you can see who's actually showing up. You can see who's actually contributing. That's actually honestly why we also have a GitHub style like heat map, for example, where it's really the same idea. It's just, there's this project or there's this thing that you want to see succeed or you want to see happen. So you're going to put in that effort to, and it obviously doesn't have to be every day, right? But you're going to put in that effort to see it succeed or to see it happen. And I mean, you don't like a good contributor doesn't have to be like always present, for example, but even if it's like, someone's doing something once a week, they're still actively contributing. So it is kind of it's a case by case thing, obviously, depending on what the actual thing is. But yeah, I mean, it's really just about showing up, and it's really about like taking agency for yourself as a contributor. And of course, who is a good contributor and who isn't may be hard to note or keep track of early on, which again is why it's like looking at the record or the tracking of contributions over time. It just helps with that process by a lot, because that now you have not just your individual record, but now you have this community record. So it becomes much easier, much more clear to say, okay, this person is really stepping up. You can look at not just the work that you've done over time, but the types or the categories of work. And then now that means you can actually follow what you focused on the most, maybe what you want to do that's different by switching somewhere else, because now there's a gap that needs to be filled. It really is about, and I mean, this is also why I'm working on this, right? Because I think it really is about the actual tracking and recording of contributions at the end of the day.
So I actually want to focus more on this because I think this is super important. Because we are an educational talk show, and the idea, I think, that we both agree on, is to try to get more people to both understand DAOs and want to contribute more into them and know how. And I could definitely speak from my own experience. I'm curious if you had a similar experience. Being part of a group on Discord, crypto group, of course, right? Talking about different things and sharing our own ideas and plays and whatnot. And then, from there, I get pulled into this one really awesome project, a volunteer project, actually, probably the biggest one. Then another one, a third one, and everyone else is getting pulled like that. And people just show up. And because of showing up, they get pulled into these various other projects, some actual work opportunities, right? Others volunteer opportunities, but regardless, they get pulled into interesting projects. I get pulled personally into interesting projects based on just showing up. And as a result, you have relationships forming, you have projects forming, you have teams forming, you have things actually happening in the crypto space, whether wherever the actual practical application could be, in finance, DeFi, it could be in music and arts, it could be in ecological things, like solar power, etc. It could be in whatever it is, right? Gaming. But have you had that kind of experience, and can you share a bit, something that comes to mind of just by showing up, you or others you noticed have been invited to various projects and teams and have become part of something?
Yeah, I mean, that's happened so many times, honestly. That's actually how I got involved in Govern to begin with. I just happened to show up to a few different calls, really, and I started helping out on my own. And eventually this became a full-time role. And you see that happen all the time, like it's like even pre-DAOs, right? With like crypto communities who are building projects. You see, someone in the audience or even on the Telegram chat who is stepping up or talking a lot or helping people out. They usually become community managers, right? That happens all the time. So it is. I mean, it's this balance of making sure you're not doing too much, and this also largely depends on your own situation, like financial situation, for example. Sometimes you have the space to do a lot of work without necessarily being compensated, but maybe you don't. So then early on, it's kind of just about being there, seeing what's going on, maybe helping out a little bit, but also understanding creating expectations and understanding expectations. But there have been so many times, and even for a lesser example, like that's kind of how airdrops work, right? You kind of just use something and then you get included in the list. So there's so many different types of interactions where just like being present has led to a lot of, opportunities, whether financial or occupational.
That actually brings me to another question that for me seems logical. For the contributor itself, right? What makes it worth it? Is it just the possibility of getting drops? Is it participating in something bigger? Is it? I mean, I can think of many things, but in your opinion, what really makes it worth it for a contributor to contribute in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, good question. It definitely depends on like what the project is. I think for a lot of the DAO space, and obviously there are very different kinds of DAOs, but what I've seen a lot is just this idea of, hey, what we're actually building could potentially bring about a lot of change or improve people's circumstances in a very interesting way. So I think, yeah, it's really about, at least it tends to be about making some impact, right? Or doing something that is going to last a long time. Like that's also why we interact. It's one of the reasons why we interact with blockchains, because we know that, what you do actually has an impact, and it might just be on your, an impact on yourself, but at the very least, it's something that can't just be easily taken away or easily degraded.
Speaking of taking away, there's a question I saw in the comments someone asked. But before that, there is someone who commented for, I think maybe a few years. Someone with username Funky Bull, maybe. Great chat so far. Appreciate hearing your takes, said Stefen. So just so you know, you have a fan here. But to get back to the questions, there's one that I really like. Can only find it. Something about here. So speaking of Azuki and other scandals, well, not really Azuki, but rug pull scenarios. Let's say someone who has something to do with Bahamas, I think, FTX, right, and others. So the comment asks, do you feel there's any possibility of one getting his reputation back, even after he's been involved in the messy DAO with a bad record? And also, on the other hand, what would be major things to look out for when joining a DAO for someone who has several different options of DAOs to join? So on the one hand, I guess the questions in one. On the one hand, how to get your reputation back, and once it's been sold by one thing or another. And the other question is, as a person looking to join DAOs and kind of seeing all these different DAOs, what are the signs to look out for, the red flags, so to speak?
Oh, wow. These are really good questions. I will try to answer them with some kind of sense. But in terms of reputation, I mean, reputation is such an open-ended thing that it's very hard to pinpoint, how exactly one gains or loses it, right? So I guess, speaking from the govern perspective, it is why we have like, we have it in a way where, again, you have the contribution layer at the bottom, right? And then you can actually, maybe you can get it from Coordinate or another project where you have your own basically reputation layer that you can build on top of the contribution layer. And what that allows is, because at the end of the day, reputation in communities should be contextual. It should be based on, the expectations and the terms or whatever, or conditions of that community, which may not at all be relevant for another community or another DAO, or at the very least, it may not be as contextual. So, yeah, I think that's such a hard question to answer, because, so let's say, one DAO that's built its own kind of reputation layer on top of Govern. They have their own rules, they have their own way to interact. Another DAO could be could create their own and it could be completely different. So when transferring from one to the other, for example, let's say you lost your reputation in one DAO and now you're going to the next DAO to try to, just try to contribute. Yeah, that's what happens is that at the end of the day, what you have is your record of your contributions. So at the very least, those, if they don't, like, they may not have the specific context of why you lost your reputation, but the work that you've done and say, maybe I'll still trust them. Or you could have, again, goes back to trust frameworks where you stuff where that those contributions only get accepted, after a certain amount of attestations or people co-signing it. So the real easy answer, but I think the idea is to make sure a reputation is understandable by, whoever goes somewhere else. And what was the second question?
For the person joining DAOs, red flags to look out for.
So many
questions.
Yeah, I mean, kind of existential, but I mean, I think so if things are happening in public, that's at the very least, that's a sign that you can actually follow what's going on pretty easily. So let's say they have, all their votes on a platform like Discourse, for example, where you can actually see not just what's being voted on, but the reasons why, and then how people are voting, how people are, just talking about it and commenting. And usually when you see a community that is thoughtful about how things are happening, then that's usually, a good sign. If it seems that there's a lot of just arguments and screaming at each other, obviously big red flag. And that raises another point, right? Like because there'll always be conflict within any organization. So being able to see how maybe a DAO does conflict resolution or how people try to resolve certain things, that's a huge way to see, if this is a community that you want to be a part of or not. And even things like, okay, how does voting happen? Is it just like a raw token? Does it look like there are whales that are, just kind of pushing the decision, like pushing every decision? And even smaller things in terms of like, how often do people meet? What do they talk about in meetings? You're usually able to sense bad vibes fairly early on, at least. But yeah, I think just being really observant into how people interact with each other, and also how their mechanisms are set up can really help.
Totally. I just noticed, by the way, that Fungible, the one I mentioned earlier, has a really cool question, and I'm gonna try to give him a speaker role, and so you can ask it in person. But let me try. If not, I'll just read it myself. But I really like the questions. Fungible, if you can hear it, I just sent you an invite. I would love for you to read your question out loud. It's a regular one.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Totally, yeah. Welcome, and great question. I'm looking forward to you asking it.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for hosting this, and yeah, I've really appreciated the questions so far and Stefan's responses and takes. Yeah, my question is just, how do you see or might advise DAOs to create either the environment or a model where progress is swift, but also safe and decentralized in terms of decision making, and then the execution, because I feel like one issue that's commonly brought up, and apologies if you touched on this already, but one commonly brought up issue is a felt or actual sense of problematic, like, diffusion of responsibility, where many DAO members I'm friends with will say, yeah, we we keep meeting, but we're not really like the goals are being achieved, and we're not really sure what those goals are. So yeah, just curious to hear your thoughts on the balance to be found there or created.
And you mean just in terms of the, basically progressive decentralization, like how to make sure that's maybe efficient or effective or things can actually get done?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
I mean, that's probably one of the biggest questions and definitely something that we're all kind of figuring out. So I definitely won't claim to have a particularly robust answer for that. But I do think there's a number of different ways. I think, for example, like work streams or pods can help with that, where you have certain functions being done by a small module or a small group that can be kind of more, I guess, slightly more centralized than the wider DAO. So I think those can really help, especially in terms of the question of expertise or subject matter expertise that was brought up earlier, where you have, again, like you're worried about how people are running the treasury, or worried about how people are setting up governance mechanisms. But the people, you can have, like, maybe, I'm just throwing out a number here, 5 people who are clearly very knowledgeable and have that expertise kind of become their own layer in terms of, okay, let's at least let them maybe not necessarily run the decision, but have a specific amount of say in the decision. But yeah, I mean, these are all things that we're all kind of playing around with. And again, there are other aspects such as roles, like specific roles where maybe only these particular people have a certain level of access or a certain level of power to do something. And that changes as things grow, as time moves on. Again, this is like, for example, what Hats Protocol is doing, or Guild, for example. And then with us, in terms of having trust frameworks, so that and that's actually how we built our verification framework feature, where maybe you're opening your DAO up from 10 people to like 100 people, which means it's going to be a little more chaotic by default. And also maybe you don't have that same high level of trust, but then you can set it up where, again, you any contribution that comes in from these new people, they have to have maybe 2 or 3 or whatever number you choose attestations from the community, or maybe from the core group, so that you can still open it up for new people to come in and contribute and add, but there's at least a layer or like kind of a barrier that they have to pass through, just so you and that's how you kind of build this trust at scale, where, or at least this trust framework at scale, to where, yeah, you can have a lot of new people, but there's still something that they have to go through that maybe the core team, for example, has more power over. So it doesn't just get like blow up and get chaotic.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just my bad.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say thanks for the response. I feel like a lot of the stuff you'd mentioned previously on just establishing culture, as well as vision and intent, and then the context you provided of making sure there are focused groups and people, pods, whatever you want to call them, working on those things in a concerted way. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks so much for the response. Definitely seems like a tough thing to crack, but it's cool to hear how others active in that realm are thinking about it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna add, like, I'm kind of sitting here biting my tongue because this is exactly what we were working on, what we developed, and we're gonna release in a couple of months with the DeXe doc structure. But I don't want to make this about us. I'll just drop some hints. It's about meritocracy. It's about proper incentives that are aligned for everyone, and of course being transparent about all of it. And for the rest, you're gonna have to just follow our socials. Let's plug that for a little bit. And I also recommend that you follow Stefan's socials, obviously. and wait a couple months. Okay? You'll see all result. But really, I don't want to plug myself. So we have one request to speak and one really cool question that I saw, maybe multiple ones, and since we're kind of running on the hour, oh no, the speaker request just is no, it's back. That was interesting. Okay, so this is bizarre. It keeps popping on and off. Let me try. Okay, Sergio. Okay, you can speak now. Sergio, you do have a question, right? Sergio?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sergio. You're on. Would you like to ask a question?
Okay, my concern is what kind of feature update to come in near future on this, and now update of product to release.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand them. Stefen, did you understand that? Sergio?
I didn't get it.
Yeah, Sergio, can you repeat it, please?
Please.
I think we're having a hard time hearing you. Can you type it in the chat and I'll read it out for Stefen? Because we are running out of time, but I'd certainly love to hear a good question. Let me just read one out that I saw is a really good question in the chat if I find it. And then I'm going to ask an easy one for once, maybe an easy one, depending, to let Stefen go with a little bit off the hook. Okay, not this one. Oh, wow. Okay, here we go. I like this. So this comes from Airstar of SweetSwap and OKX, or that's what's in the profile. Many DAOs don't take into consideration the need for members to properly contextualize / understand the DAO on their onboarding journey. How do you design better onboarding systems that help members build context about a DAO? So I think onboarding is one of those things that's not being sufficiently addressed, and I would love to hear more on that personally. So I like that question.
Yeah, onboarding is always super interesting. And the cool thing is that you can see that you can usually see, which DAOs are doing onboarding pretty well. A lot of DAOs have, proper onboarding programs where they actually, spend time, specific people will spend time and talk to you about what the DAO's needs are, how that interacts with your needs, and just, what things are being worked on. And a lot of the times you also see DAOs, keep very good records of kind of progress and updates in general. And that's always super helpful. On our side, in terms of how people interact with the DAO contributions, right? It's made up of all the individual contributions for that DAO. And when you're looking at a kind of bird's eye view, you can see, again, not just the specific types, like the specific tasks or the specific pieces of work that are happening. You can also see what category of work is happening in real time. Like what, is this just, like, let's say, for example, if you're a dev, are they just like pull requests, for example? Or if you're in growth, are they demo calls? Are these votes happening? So being able to actually zoom out for someone to come into a DAO very new, maybe very little context, but they can actually see these this category, all these categories of work that are happening in real time, and also being able to follow, okay, this happened a lot in, maybe July, or this happened a lot in the first quarter, maybe second quarter, this didn't happen as much. It becomes much easier for a new contributor to say like, oh, I'll come over here where this type of work is happening all the time, just so I can get more comfortable. Or maybe this other thing isn't happening as much. I can go straight there and kind of fill in these gaps. So that's also, why we included this kind of interaction, what we call a DAO dashboard on Govern, so that anyone who's part of the community can very easily see and understand and grasp the work that's actually happening.
Yeah, That totally makes sense. And dashboard, it's in any case very useful, but especially for onboarding, to make it as clear as possible what this is all about, and make it easy to get a feel for it, right? To not get lost. I'm gonna rush this a little bit because it's actually beyond 8 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you here too long. But we have Roman who wants to ask a question, and Roman always asks good questions, so I'll let him do it, and then kind of wrap up with one very short, very easy answer question. Roman, I'm putting you on now. And by the way, while Roman is connecting, the next question, I'm just gonna spoil it. It's gonna be anyone who you recommend, any cool projects that you would recommend for others to follow. Just straightforward like that.
Hey guys,
Hi, Roman.
Stefan, for all the information. I want to hear your vision takes about decentralization. What's your take on whether a DAO should be fully decentralized? I mean, really, right now all DAOs are sort of centralized, and that always benefits someone. And it's okay to kick off centralized and then gradually shift to being decentralized. But should they aim for fully decentralized governance?
Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, so you're saying obviously with progressive decentralization, a lot of people start small and kind of decide on very centralized, and they decide to, progressively decentralize as things go, with the goal of eventually becoming fully decentralized, which a lot of people have. And it's cool. It's good to know that, at least there's the goal, but you're asking more in terms of the governance aspect itself.
Yeah, I have some problem with connection, but yeah, I mean, do they need to have aim goals to go fully decentralized? Like do they need to think about this in near future? Because now how my connection is really with
We can hear you though.
because now almost all the DAO not decentralized, not autonomous, but do they need this actually, or they could live live now?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's a really, honestly, a really philosophical one. I think, and obviously the most important thing to remember is that decentralization is a spectrum, right? So you can be less decentralized, you can be more decentralized. You can, slowly get more and more decentralized with the goal of becoming fully. But then, of course, there is the question of what actually does fully decentralized mean? I don't think any of us actually know at a granular level, but yeah, it's hard to answer because it really depends on what the community's goals are. Like, not every community needs to be 100% decentralized. That's just the reality. But I think the more important thing to think about is not so much trying to be 100% decentralized, but trying to be as anti-capturable, basically, as much as possible, which means that if at any point one person can rug pull or one person can kind of take over, that's the hurdle that you need to get past. And once you get past that hurdle, then the question is like, okay, now that's where it becomes more progressive in the sense of, are we decentralized enough where one person and then maybe one group and then maybe two colluding groups can take over? And I think that's how people should look at it, in terms of, making sure you reach these milestones and you continue to pass new milestones in terms of that aspect of decentralization, or that aspect of being anti-capturable.
I love that, especially the anti-rug pull kind of criteria. I think we can all get behind. I mean, there's very few people in crypto other than the rug pullers themselves. Right.
Quick shout out to Spencer Graham. He wrote something really cool on anti-capture. I'll try to find it.
Speaking of, that's a perfect segue into the very last question of the day. Who would you like to give shout outs to? Maybe people that came with you to the podcast, to this live talk or projects you would love. This is your platform.
Yeah, shout out to everyone who joined. This was really cool. I see Natalie down there. Shout out to you. And I guess I think the coolest thing about, I see Trish down there. What's up? The coolest thing about this DAO tool space is that people are building in such an interesting way, where a lot of the conversations we have with other DAO tools are about collaborating and finding new ways that these tools in a modular way can work together to create, more robust DAOs. And I think that's really the key. And that's really the goal, to where any community has as much control as possible of their own online interactions, or the type of platforms that they can use, and not having to be stuck on a specific platform if things change. You don't want a Reddit situation, for example, or a Facebook group situation where you just don't have any power. So these tools coming together to build in a modular way, which allows for, less platform lock, more maneuverability around tools, is really cool.
Awesome. I'm gonna obviously thank you hugely. You're lots of fun to talk, and took all the provocative questions in stride, which I always appreciate. And just want to let you go because I'm sure you have some awesome Bahamas weather to enjoy, and obviously a lot of crypto work to do because we're always building. So just huge thanks to Stefen, and I would love to have you back, maybe on a panel or something if you're up for it later. Of course, we'll stay in touch. And like you said, huge thanks to everyone who came. We had a very lively discussion, lots of questions. I couldn't even keep track of all of them, to be honest. So apologies to anyone whose questions I didn't get to read to ask Stefen. But hopefully you all got something out of this, and go govern, go participate in contribute. You've heard it all now, even about onboarding and what rug pulls to wood, right? Go for it, just do it. This sounds a little oversimplified, but I personally believe that it's really that simple. Of go play with the DAO, and of course, Stefen's company, GovernHQ, and DeXe DAO, obviously, and many others are building tools that are aiming to help make it easier. So if you find that's a little too difficult, ask in our social media accounts, ask in Stefen's social media accounts. There's so many people in the industry, so to speak, who are happy to help people learn and onboard them and get them involved in various groups. And there are so many groups you can get involved with. So go govern, go DAO.
Go govern.
Yeah, go govern, right? and that's it. Again, thanks to everyone. Thanks to Stefen. This was lots of fun for me personally.
Yes, it's great. Thanks a lot, everyone. And of course, check out Govern. You can use it as an individual. You can use it as a community. But we're also always happy to get feedback as well.
Yeah, so go check out all of Stefen's social medias, Twitter, and obviously GovernHQ. Check out the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance. Go visit Bahamas. I think we'll all benefit from that. I'm trying to sound not too jealous, but yeah. Thank you, everyone. Again, thank you, Stefen. This has been a blast.
Definitely. Thanks, y'all.
All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. We're back next week with another awesome guest. But for now, goodbye.